Howdy Smite fans, it's J-Mac here. Phase number 3 is back in full swing, and we get our first look at our teams in over 6 weeks since they've had some competitive play. How does everything shake up as teams now start getting ready for their road to Worlds? Well, let's take a look back and see what happened in week number 1 in this week's episode of the SPL Weekly Recap. And our brand new phase kicked off with the Atlantis Leviathans up against the Oni Warriors. The Leviathans, with some experimenting in the dual lane with the mages for Zapman, unfortunately couldn't keep pace with the Oni Warriors, who exerted pressure in the dual lane in order to win out the lane and take favor across the map. And it's the Oni Warriors who come out with a 2-0 to win the set. And next up, we had the Olympus Bolts up against the Tartarus Titans. The Bolts in both games established an early lead, but just couldn't close out kind of the mid-late game area against the Titans. But the odd triple assassin Titans comp had damage to spare, and they were able to steamroll over the Bolts when it came to the end games of both of these long-winded matchups. And it was a 2-0 for the Tartarus Titans. Our Saturday started off with the Jade Dragons up against the Solar Scarabs. The Dragons were able to take a clean game number 1 and decided to do a little experimenting of their own in game number 2, putting Scream on Atlas mid and Pagon in Najat jungle. While it was a weird role swap, it worked out for the Dragons, and they take the set 2-0 over the Solar Scarabs. And then our second set of Saturday was the Camelot Kings against the Valhalla Valkyries. The Valks did well in both games, getting some early kills and pressure, but unfortunately they ran into what we like to call the 20-minute iron wall of the Camelot Kings. Once the mid-late game started to roll around, the Camelot Kings team fight was what is able to net them the 2-0 over the Valkyries to get their first win of Phase 3. And to start out our triple header Sunday, we had the Atlantis Leviathans up against the Tartarus Titans. The Leviathans returned to traditional Smite, and this time, traditional Smite wins out. Strong early games for the Levi's grant them early kills. Those early kills then transition into leads, which allow them to dominate the late game and push the Titans away from victory. And the Leviathans win out 2-0. In our second set, we had the Olympus Bolts up against the Solar Scarabs. Game number 1 was a dominant jam-it-down play style from the Bolts, and that was able to net themselves a pretty swift and pretty easy game number 1. And game number 2 was shaping up to be the exact same style, but once Scary D started to rotate towards these fights with his Hades, he quickly became a massive threat and a powerhouse for the Scarabs, helping to elevate his team to not only win the game, but tie up the set. Game number 3 was a back-and-forth bout, both teams trading blows until the late game when the Bolts were able to squeak out a couple too many team fights, and in one final Fire Giant push, the Scarabs get caught out of position and the Bolts are able to clean up a couple of kills and take the game and the set 2-1. Now rounding out our week, we had the Camelot Kings up against the Jade Dragons. It was a rematch from our Smite Summer Masters Finals. But unlike the finals, this one wasn't nearly as close. The Jade Dragons' game plan was to drag the Kings through the mud with early scrapping, and they did just that. 2 games of early invades and early brawling led the Dragons to a very decisive 2-0 victory over the Camelot Kings, and netted the Dragons their 10th straight set victory ever since they brought their new jungler in. And there you have it. Is there any team out there that can stop the Jade Dragons? As of week 1, the answer to that was no. Both the Jade Dragons and the Oni Warriors do remain undefeated as we move in towards week number 2, and there are a couple of opportunities for someone to try and slow down and dethrone the Dragons from this winning streak. But if you missed out on any of the matches in week 1, you can go back on youtube.com/SmitePod to catch up on those. Watch the behind-the-scenes action with our pros over on youtube.com/SmitePro, or tune in live right now on twitch.tv/SmiteGame to catch as we kick off Phase 3, week number 2 of the SMITEPro League.